And today's announcement is putting an end to the president's ambitions to bring home our American forces before he leaves office.
Today's decision from the president to adjust our troop presence in Afghanistan gives us the chance to finish what we started. This will keep Americans safer back home.
The United States keeps our commitments.
Today, we deliver our own message to President Ghani and the Afghan people. We're with you. We support you. And we're not going to give up the gains we fought so hard to achieve.
Former Congressman Colonel Alan West is live in Dallas. Good evening, sir. And the news: the president is going to leave some. Good evening. The president's going to leave about 1,500 troops over there. Is that a good idea? Is that enough? Is that too many? Or how do you know?
Well, that's the whole thing, is we don't really know. The commanders on the ground have what they call a troop to task. And what we heard today was a president who said that the combat operations are still been ended. And of course, there's only way you can end combat out two ways, is by winning or losing. You just don't withdraw. And then he said that the troops that will be there will not be in a combat role or a combat mission. So why are we leaving 9,800 there right now and 5,500 later? What we need to be focused on is the enemy. Just last week, we had one of the, earlier this week, we had one of the largest joint special operations raids with the Afghans against two Al-Qaeda bases that have been established in Kandahar. So I think that we need to stop playing, the campaign promises game and say that we need to defeat this enemy. I believe that the president was dragged to this because he does not want a repeat of Iraq, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and some of the other places where he has put political decisions over true strategic decisions.
Is Afghanistan a national security threat to us right now?
Yes, it is. I believe that you have to be able to articulate to the American people that anywhere that Islamic jihadists and these terrorists want to establish a sanctuary, which is exactly what the Taliban did when we allowed them to take power after the Russians withdrew as part of the Afghan civil war, they invited in Al-Qaeda and they established a base. And now we know that Al-Qaeda is bleeding people over to ISIS because there are certain jihadists that don't think Al-Qaeda is strong enough.
How is that different from areas like in Nigeria where they have Boko Haram, where they're trying to likewise get an area? I mean, there are lots of places in the world that are created. We're not sending people there.
Well, that's the thing that we need to have, is someone that can sit back and look at this strategically and based upon the geographic areas of responsibility, like the Central Command, the Africa Command, Pacific Command, European Command, look at the right force mix so that we can do strike operations. No more of this nation building, building schools and roads and things like of this nature. We need to be able to find the enemy, fix him in position, engage him with all available weapon systems, attempt to destroy him in place, and pursue him and to defeat him. That's what we have to be able to do, and that's not what we're doing.
I guess what worries me is that when we get down to 5,500, they're sort of sitting ducks at that point because there's strength in numbers. Yeah. And, it's like, to me, it's like, we're really maybe even at 9,800, we're at that point. And that's what worries me. I see so many of these injured vets, and I meet so many of them. I know families who have lost members. I mean, I worry when we get down to these low numbers.
Well, you should worry about that. And again, that comes back to the troop to task. The president did not specify what the task and purpose will be for those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that are there. It takes about 5 to 6 logistical support soldiers on the ground for every one combat soldier. So when you think about that battlefield calculus, use that against the 5,500 or the 9,800, and then you really get to understand that we don't have the trigger pullers that are out there.
Colonel, thank you. Always nice to see you, sir.
Thank you, Greta.
President Obama promising to bring the troops home by the time he left office. Well, that's not happening. Is that a flip-flop, or is that evolving based on changed circumstances? And how do you tell? The on-the-record political panel is here. From the Hill, Bob Cusack and ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, I guess if you don't like the person, it's flip-flopping. If you like the person, it's evolving based on circumstances.
That's precisely right. But make no mistake, this has become a presidential talking point for a long time, ending 2 wars. It's a bitter disappointment for him of the strategy to have to reverse himself and to reinsert troops. And interestingly, it cuts in politics in some strange angles because it's not an obvious thing where the Democrats will support and the Republicans will oppose. On a policy level, you'll have a lot of Republicans support. Democrats will have to say they're supporting, but I think it's a hard thing to label a flip-flop when you're talking also about national security and trying to actually make that region safer.
It's a good thing, I think, for leaders to change their mind based upon the conditions on the ground. But there's no doubt, I agree with Rick, is that this president, this White House has had goals they have not met in Afghanistan. In 2010, Joe Biden said, come hell or high water, we're out of Afghanistan by the end of 2014. So now not going to be out by 2016. I think the other thing is, what's the mission? Ash Carter says, finish what we started. I think there's a lack of clarity and has been a lack of clarity. Maybe if you just tell the American people we're not going to have big footprints, but we're going to have to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda wherever they are as small forces, 5,000, 10,000. I don't know, but I think there's a lack of clarity, and there has been.
Well, that brings me back to the question of, there are lots of places like, horrible places, Boko Haram, where they do terrible things, and I don't know, I mean, leaving 5,000 worries me in Afghanistan. Is our mission over? I mean, we can never cure their problems.
Right. I think the mission, at least in the medium term, is to transfer authority over to Afghan security forces and to make sure you have enough resources there to do the kind of counterterrorism operations that are still necessary in the region. But Bob is right. I mean, and the president has used it as a political talking point. Those quotes that you mentioned, a lot of these things came up in the 2012 campaign. They were proud of the fact that they had a plan to end the war in Afghanistan. They contrasted that with Mitt Romney. Clearly, though, that strategy is not even one that the president believes has continued to be successful.
Why is he doing this? I mean,
I think he's under a lot of pressure from military leaders, and I think there's going to be a lot more reported on differences between the Pentagon and the White House. And when you think about it, though, whether it's Iraq, and certainly I think Iraq had some role here, and ISIS and the spread of ISIS there, and as well as Syria, you don't want to have a safe haven. But if you look at it, we've been talking about training Afghan and Iraqi forces for more than a decade. And we've had reporters in Afghanistan just say, it's just, the military leaders say, it just can't happen. They're just not equipped to do it.
But look at the training we did in Syria. $500 million was authorized, and I mean, that's a nightmare. The president canceled that. We got out of Iraq without a status of forces agreement, and no sooner we get out, ISIS is there. I mean, look, the whole place is a nightmare.
Right, and I'm curious to see if those failures in particular force a reassessment, because it's an easy thing to say we're going to train local authorities, local troops to be able to do exactly what we want to do, but it is proving to be difficult in every instance. And
I'm not so sure how much they want us.
No, some leaders do in different countries, but at the same time, this whole equation changes if we were struck at home. And I do think it is important you can't have another Afghanistan bin Laden situation. Because for a while, that mission was clear, get bin Laden. And then after we got bin Laden, it's been a little
Well,
murky.
I guess I regret we're not talking about the vets, the VA, what's happened to the vets here. And we're spending a lot of money, it seems, unaccounted for. And I certainly want the United States to be safe. But I always, the conversation needs to take a look a little bit at the people who have made the sacrifice already. Anyway, I'm taking the last word. Panel, thank you.
Thanks, Greta. Thanks.